as my sense of faith began to awaken, I knew that my values were changing. You know, I'd seen myself on this particular career path where I was heading towards wanting to stay in the bank and obviously educate myself and then get to a point of, you know, the heady heights of being a bank manager or whatever, wherever that led me. But I suddenly found myself in a situation where the values that I had were beginning to change quite dramatically. I would go into work each day knowing that I wanted to work hard and you know, do whatever job I was doing well and with integrity. But I would come away at the end of the day with a sense of dissatisfaction, feeling like, no, this isn't my life's path. I need to make some changes. And really it was around that time that I began to think, well, what could life be like? What does it mean to get involved in a work that is meaningful and is having an impact on other people's lives? You know, I looked at the world before me and I really sort of saw a clean slate. I saw that there were countries around the world that were desperately in need. I saw that there were situations where, you know, lots of situations where one could get involved in trying to make a difference. And I kind of looked at the whole world and just asked myself the question, where should I go? I also really, you know, from my faith perspective, began to pray and ask God, you know, what is it that you want me to do? What is the role that you want me to play in this world? And it was around that time that, you know, through various means, I began to hear about Hong Kong, the small territory in Southeast Asia there that England had been running for over 100 years. And I had known nothing about Hong Kong. I didn't really know much about it as a city or its history. But various people talked to me about it, and I found myself becoming curious about this place and thinking to myself, well, is this a place that has need? And around the same time as I began asking that question, somebody came to me and said, well, there's a lady who is from the UK, her name is Jackie Pullinger, and she as a 21-year-old had gone out from England, also to Hong Kong, with the desire to get involved in making a difference in that particular city, in that community. I came out away from reading that book and thought to myself, you know, she's gone to this place, she's made a difference, she's accomplished something, she's really transformed people's lives, and this is what I'm hoping and wanting to do with my life. And so I began to really think about that part of the world. Maybe there was a role for me in Hong Kong, or maybe somewhere in Asia where I could be involved in making a difference. And so September the 3rd, 1990, I got on a plane and I flew out to Hong Kong. And I still remember to this day landing at the old Hong Kong airport and flying in over all the apartment blocks, landing onto the runway and looking out at this city that seemed so completely different from anything I'd ever experienced before, and realizing that this was going to be my home. This was going to be the place where I was going to be spending a good part of my time. I was 19 years old, so it was I was still quite young when I went out there. You know, and even today I look back and think, wow, 19-year-old traveling across the world, trying to find their sense of life fulfillment and to embark on some kind of meaningful vocation. Sometimes I think I was probably quite naive, but you know, sometimes ignorance is also bliss. I probably didn't think about some of the issues that I should have thought of. I would hate to have missed it simply because I wanted to remain secure in having a banking job back in England. A few weeks later on into my time in Hong Kong, I was given an opportunity to travel into China, this huge nation that has been, in many ways, covered away from our sight with the bamboo curtain. It's not a nation that we've known a lot about, it's a mysterious country. And I began to find myself getting very curious about this country and wondering if the next step was somehow going to be there. I remember leaving Hong Kong on a boat and sailing up the river into the city of Shanghai, and the city of Shanghai emerging out of the mist. And I remember just having this great sense of feeling like I was coming home. It's a strange thing to try and explain, but it felt in my heart like I'd arrived in the place that I was meant to be. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I'd at least found the right place. China is a nation of, as I said, 1,300 million people, and there's only a very, very small percentage that speak English. And so I knew that if I wanted to do anything in China in the long term, I would need to learn to speak Mandarin. And I moved actually to the island of Taiwan, just very close to the coastline of China, to spend 2 years studying Mandarin Chinese, really with the desire to prepare myself so that when that language study was over, I could go back to China and actually begin to get involved in whatever the vocation was that I should be doing. So I remember really clearly one Friday evening being in my apartment and the phone ringing. And it was a friend of mine from Hong Kong, a lady that I'd met during my time there who'd become a good friend. And I remember her calling me and saying, "Dave, I'm going to be leaving my job in Hong Kong as a social worker, and I'm going to be moving into southern China to live and to work in an orphanage there." And she was calling me to ask me to pray for her. And of course I responded and said, "Absolutely, I'll pray for you." But I knew in my heart as well, God was saying to me, "You know, there's an opportunity here that I don't want you to miss." And so when I responded back to her and said, "Of course I'll pray for you," I found myself saying to her, "But I'd also like to come and visit you. I want to see for myself what it is that you're doing." And so a few months later, in the January of 1993, I got on a plane, I left Taiwan and I flew into mainland China. And I remember going into this orphanage. I'd never been into an orphanage in China before. I remember walking through the door of the orphanage into the courtyard and expecting to hear the sounds of children laughing and playing. And yet what I found was children that were making no sound. There was no laughter. What's more, there was no tears, there was no crying. Just children that were completely shut off, completely closed off to the world because of how they were suffering. Initially, when we first went in, it was a room of babies. They were all in different cribs, cots around the walls. I remember looking down into each of the cribs and seeing 4 or 5 babies in each one. And as I looked down into these faces of the babies, there was just no response. There was no smile. They were just completely cut off. You could see that when you looked at their bodies that they were malnourished, that they were covered in skin diseases, that many of them actually were deteriorating so much that they were probably going to die within a very, very short period of time. And I went from one cot to the next, from one crib to the next, seeing baby after baby that were in that kind of condition, malnourished and neglected. It was just so evident that these children had no value. Nobody was placing any value on them at all. I remember leaving that particular part of the orphanage and walking into the next area, which was where some of the older children with disabilities were. And many of these children, because of their disabilities, they were incontinent. And so many of these older children with disabilities were just tied onto little metal framed chairs, little potty chairs. And the chairs were sat over sewers, open drains, so that when they went to the toilet, it would just fall through and go into the sewer. And these children were just tied onto these chairs and left there. Nobody interacting with them or talking to them. And they would just look at you with completely blank expressions. There was no life in their eyes at all. You just got the sense that even though the body was still alive, that somehow their spirit had already died. I walked away from that part of the orphanage and saw children through a window that was barred, and children that were just left 12, 13 years old naked, and they were just running around, and the staff didn't know how to care for them. They said, "Oh, these children, they're crazy. We don't know how to look after them. We don't know how to help them, and so we just leave them in this room." And I remember then going up to the second floor of the orphanage and entering into a room that my friend had warned me about. She said to me, "Dave, I don't know if you want to go in there. I don't know if you want to see what's in there." And when I asked her why, she said, "Well, there are so many babies and children that are abandoned in China, that are abandoned into this orphanage each day, each week, that sometimes there are just too many. There's not enough bed spaces left for them. And so what will happen is they'll pick the sicker ones, the weaker ones, and then they'll put them into a room and they'll leave them there until they die." As I walked into that room, I saw a sight that I'll never forget, of 4 children, 4 babies, and 3 of them had already died, and one of them was literally just drawing her last breaths. And I came out of that situation, I came out of that moment just totally overwhelmed, just totally numbed by what I'd seen. I just couldn't comprehend that children, that babies, could be living in such pain and in such need. And I went back to the room that I was staying in that night and didn't know how to process it, how to make sense of what I'd seen at all. I just didn't know what to do. The next morning I remember going back in the second day with my friend again, and as we walked into the orphanage, one of the orphanage caregivers came up to us and said, a new baby just came in. And I remember saying to my friend, can we go see her? And we walked over into the baby room and saw this little perfect baby girl just lying there in one of the cots. She was just 4 hours old. And it was just evident looking down at her that she was just going to end up in the same kind of deteriorated state as all the other babies in that room. And something in my heart just kind of cried out. When I saw this perfect baby girl, I just thought, I can't leave this little one to die. I can't leave her to end up in the same kind of situation. And I turned to my friend and said, can we do something? Can we somehow help this little one? And my friend said, well, sure, let's maybe ask the director. And we took her out of the orphanage. We took her back to my friend's place. We cared for her. We tried to keep her warm. My friend even slept with her cradled against her breast that evening, because it was the only way we could ensure that she would get the kind of heat that she would need to survive. And then the next morning, we looked down at her and we realised that she wasn't doing well, that she'd begun to cough up a little bit of blood, and we thought she needs to be in hospital. And so we took her to the hospital, which was where we felt was the best place for her to be. And as we left her and went about doing the different things through the day, of course, we couldn't help but thinking about her and wondering how she was doing. And we came back later on in that day just to check on her. And we asked, how's she doing? And they said, oh, she's dead.
Cold, cold water surrounds me now.
At that moment, something inside of me rose up. It was almost like a cry that said, it shouldn't be this way. This isn't the way the world is meant to be. This isn't the way children are supposed to live. I remember coming to a place where I was saying, God, is this really how you want this situation to be? I don't believe that you create the lives of these children for them to experience this kind of pain and this kind of death. That there has to be some hope for them. There has to be some kind of future for them. It can't just simply be born to die. That's not what you want. Why isn't there somebody here making a difference? Why doesn't somebody come and do something? And at that point, I heard what for me has been God's voice speaking to me and saying, Dave, you're here. I've shown this to you. You can make a difference. And for me, that was probably the moment. That is the moment when it all became clear. That the journey that I'd started on when I found my faith, when I left the bank, when I went to Hong Kong and then to China, after studying Chinese, after going into that orphanage, all brought me to that one particular moment. And that's what happened. That was the moment really for me when God showed me so clearly what my journey had been about. When I came to understand that that journey was bringing me to a very specific point, when I could actually engage in something that would make a life and death difference for these children. Over 6 months, I wrestled with the decision of, do I really give myself to this? Can I do this? I'm not a doctor. Can I do this? I'm not a nurse. Can I do this? Can I actually make a difference? Have I got what it takes? I really didn't know how to start. I had this passion and a desire to get involved in making a difference and a conviction that it was the right thing for me to do. But I then asked myself, well, what do you do? How do you make a difference in the lives of these children? Does anybody care? If I begin to tell people about the suffering that these children are living in, will anybody respond? Is it going to just be one person? Or really, will people catch hold of a vision of transforming the lives of these children that are so in need? And I didn't know the answer to those questions. And so I just simply began to tell my friends. I would talk to the people who I met at language school. I would talk to the people who were living in the community, my Chinese friends, some of my overseas friends. And I was just amazed. People would respond and say, we never knew. We didn't know that children were living this way. And we'd love to get involved in helping. And I found myself overwhelmed by the response. And I remember in the January of 1994, so about 1 year after the time when I'd first gone and visited an orphanage, taking in a group of people to work in China in an orphanage. it actually had a huge impact in the lives of the children. It was amazing. We would just get alongside them, and for many of them it was sort of bringing them out of a state where they had cut themselves off from the world around them. We would begin to see children smile. We would begin to see life come back into their eyes. It was almost like in the giving of the basic care and love that it reignited the will to live. Children began to flourish and to blossom before our eyes in such a short period of time. And what was amazing is it was heartbreaking to leave after 2.5 weeks and to know that we weren't going to be back for maybe 2 months until we could bring another team. And yet when I would return 2 months later with another team, I wouldn't see children who had just simply regressed back to what they'd been prior to that first team, but I would see children that had hung on to the will to live. And when we came in, every time we came in, it felt like we were building the strength of that will to live. Not only the will to live, but building their ability to engage with life, to grow and to flourish, to develop their personalities. So we've had the privilege of watching children who really had very little hope actually be able to grow and to flourish and to be nurtured to the point where they are healthy young adults now. Yes, they still have a disability, but they've received therapy, they've received care, they've received education, and their transformation has been absolutely dramatic. I can think of one little boy, Wang Wei, who came to us when he was just 6 years old. He was so tiny, he was almost skeletal. He was still being bottle fed at 6 years old. But then he came into Oasis House, and this little boy who was not even responsive when we spoke to him, who we thought was extremely mentally disabled, it turns out that he was just cut off because of the lack of care that he'd received. And as we've loved him and cared for him, first of all, he began to make sounds and to smile. He then began to learn to speak. He then began to learn to read and to write. And today he goes to a normal outside school. He has no disability. His life has been transformed through the love and the care that is received. And that's a story that I could tell you over and over again. One thing that's inevitable when you're working in an orphanage is the question, why are the conditions like they are? And I think it's really important that we understand that, because hopefully it prevents us from judging too hard. It's very difficult to put a number on how many children are abandoned in China every year, but the numbers are definitely in the hundreds of thousands. And if you imagine, as an orphanage worker, being in a situation day in, day out, where you're seeing new children come in, there aren't enough staff. Sometimes it can be one staff worker caring for 40 children. It doesn't take too long before you become totally overwhelmed, before you begin to just deal with the most common and basic needs, and then you realise you can't even meet those. And so the situation that exists in China's orphanages today is just a result of a nation that is still developing, a nation that has lacked the resources and sometimes the will to make a change in that situation. But one, I think, that has tried to some degree, to the best of its ability, to try and care for those kids, even though the reality and the result has been the death of many of those children. I think I want to be remembered as just one person in a dedicated team of people who were committed to making a difference in the lives of China's orphans. I hope that when I look back on my life, I can see that I played my part, that I lived my life faithfully, that I tried to do everything that I could to make a difference, that I was faithful in the way God called me to respond to this situation that I've been working in for these last 16 years. My experience has been that when you make that change, when you are willing to step out onto that journey, it is so fulfilling. And I think if we don't make the changes in life because we want to stay safely cocooned in what we know, then we run the risk of really missing out on an incredibly exciting adventure. My life has been an exciting adventure for sure. I would say that every single one of us has the ability to bring change. Whether that change be small or whether it be on a large scale, we can all do something. We have to stand up and we have to step out. We have to actually go out there. We have to engage with the situations that we find are difficult, the situations that probably are complex. They don't have simple solutions and simple answers, and we need to get involved in them. I think as we do that, we will be so surprised to realize that there are many people who also want to stand up and go do similar kinds of works, and they will stand shoulder to shoulder with you. I found that. I have people who stand shoulder to shoulder with me all around the world who all want to be part of making a difference to China's orphans. If there are people who want to make a difference to China's orphans, then there are people who will stand with you to bring change into the circumstances that matter to you. So don't buy the lie. Stand up and go out there and do something.